Do you want to learn how to take an unpainted jig head, apply epoxy paint, and add the weed guards yourself? Well, stick around and watch this video, and I'm going to show you just how to do that. Hi everybody, welcome to Making Bass Jigs, Part 2, Painting and Adding Weed Guards. In this video, what we're going to do is take the jigs that we poured in Part 1, pouring lead, where we used our jig mold here. Then going to move on to painting them and actually adding the weed guards, giving us a completed bass jig ready for Part 3. In Part 3, what we're going to do is take the bass jigs that we've painted and added the weed guards to, and take skirt material of different color combinations, add them to the jigs that we've painted, giving us a fully functional bass jig that you've made and you're going to take out and catch giant bass with yourself. So stick around and let's have a lot of fun with this. In Part 1, we used the jig mold here to actually pour some of the jigs that we're going to be painting today. And I have as an example in here the 1/4 ounce size, and you can see it sitting in the mold. I've already cut the overpour or the sprue off of the top of the jig. I've placed it back in the mold just for the sake of this exercise. And you can see here that it has the base pin inside the jig head. I just pop out the base pin, and that leaves a cavity right there inside where you're going to place the weed guard later on after the painting's complete. Once they're pulled from the mold, the base pin's gone. I just clip off the overpour or the sprue, the leftover lead that's here on top. And once that's clipped, I take a metal file and I just file off a little bit of the lead shavings over top of a trash receptacle, and then it's all ready for painting. Okay, so we've got some gear set up here now, and I'll go over some of the basic things, but one thing I wanted to mention is we all want to do this to have fun, but we also want to do it quickly. And early on when I would paint the jig heads, initially I would just swirl the jig head when it was heated up down in the paint, and it would fill up the cavity a little too much, and I could not get the weed guards to go into the holes. So I learned that by leaving the base pins in place, I could actually heat the heads up, swirl them, and then pull the base pins out later on. But what occurred at that point was when I would pull the base pins out, the paint would sometimes pop off with the base pin. And it wasn't until I learned that I could take a drill with a 9/64 bit and actually drill out the cavity in the jig head to a little bit larger size, heat the heads up, swirl it in the paint, tap the paint out of the cavity, and then at that point I was able to just put the weed guards in and keep on moving to the next one. At one point I called the jig mold company and I asked them if I could get a jig made with the 9/64 base pin and supply that size base pins, and they said due to the size of their operation it would be too difficult to recreate the whole process when they've been using the 1/8 inch size for so many years. What I could actually do is just contact a custom jig mold company and just have my own made with the 9/64 pins, and that would resolve all of that. So what I'll do here is I'll show you exactly how I drill the heads out and how I do it safely. I take a pair of vice grips like this that has clamps where the surfaces are flat, and it won't damage the hooks when you clamp them in place. One thing you want to be very careful of is keeping the angle the same as the base pin was inside the jig head before you drill it. Occasionally there's a burr or a little bit of lead left over, and you can actually even run the drill twice very quickly, and you're left with the actual cavity inside drilled out to 9/64 of an inch. Another option I've learned of in recent years is that you can purchase Teflon pins from many of the tackle suppliers, and as soon as you pull the base pins out after you've poured the lead and you want to heat them up for painting, you just add a Teflon pin ahead of time, heat the head up. When you pull it out, swirl it in the paint, and after the paint is applied, you pull the Teflon pin at that moment. That is absolutely necessary, because if you bake the paint with the Teflon pin in place, as soon as you pull it out after it's cooled down, the paint will actually break and chip off of the lead head. So you don't want to leave the Teflon pins in place. So there's the 3 different options I've used through the years. I either use the base pins, the Teflon pins, or just actually drill them out to a 9/64 size and then go ahead and paint them at that point. For those of you who are familiar with painting jigs, some of you may be wondering why I'm not using a fluid bed. Right now I'm just currently using this little dish right here with some epoxy paint in it, because I'm in an apartment right now and I don't have the proper cross ventilation, and I do not want to use it inside because the fluid bed tends to put off a lot of dust or little filaments of the actual powder paint into the air, and I just don't like doing that in this space. But if I had a garage or I was out in a shed or somewhere where I had some good cross ventilation, I would use the fluid bed that I own. And the fluid bed, for those of you who don't know, just consists of what's typically just like an aquarium pump here, and it's an air pump. And then that air just gets pumped into this container, and you can adjust the flow by using this valve right here. And the reason you'd want to use a fluid bed is because it keeps the actual epoxy paint constantly moving by forcing air in underneath of it, so it kind of keeps it very liquefied, if you will, and it allows you to just swirl the jig head down in, and the paint just immediately adheres to the hot jig head. There are multiple ways to heat the jig heads up. I prefer to use a toaster oven. That's actually one that I don't use to cook with, but I only commit to these jigs. You can use a cigarette lighter, a portable propane torch, you can get a heat gun. I would not recommend using your home oven or your home toaster oven to heat any of these up. It's just not something you want to be combining your cooking and jig making with. So whatever instrument you use, just use it strictly for the jig making process. What I have here is a few jigs that are drilled out, and I've got a few jigs that are going to use the Teflon pins. And when you buy the Teflon pins, they come a little longer than I need them for. I just simply take a pair of pliers that I'm going to be using to pull the jigs out and cut them right in half. Very straightforward. After that, it's just a matter of taking the Teflon pins and placing them in the cavity where the base pin had come out of when you poured them, and then you're ready to start painting. So now with the Teflon pins in place, I will just simply take the bowl that I have here that I use as my hanging rack, and I will just put the jigs with the Teflon pins on, followed by the jigs that I've drilled out. Okay, so now we're ready to heat the jigs up, and I'm going to turn the oven on. I generally leave the oven on for about 5, maybe 7 minutes, and it usually brings them up to the proper temperature to dip them into the powder paint. The directions on the powder paint that I use calls for the oven to be heated at 350 degrees, and then the jigs to be baked for about 15 minutes following that. I've got my oven set to about 375, and on this particular oven that seems about right for the jigs to be pulled out, swirled in the paint. They almost start setting up immediately, and then I just place them back inside and let them bake for that 15 minutes. Okay, for the jig with the Teflon pin, just simply take it out and dip it in the powder. Tap off both sides, try not to make a mess, and there you have a jig head that's already starting to set up right there. Pull the Teflon pin out with another pair of pliers, set it off to the side, and place it back on the bowl to continue baking. Okay, pay attention now to how much faster the process goes with the jigs that I pre-drilled to 9/64. Right back on the bowl, second one. Right back on the bowl. Another one. Dip it, tap out the powder, and we'll grab this last guy, dip, tap out the powder, and close the door, and then just let them bake for about 15 minutes. One of the things that I wanted to mention while the jigs are baking is that the Teflon pins have an advantage in that they're made of Teflon, and for that reason you can actually take the paint off that you have applied to the jig heads and have stuck to the Teflon pins when you dipped them, as long as you don't bake the Teflon pins. It's very tough to get these clean after you bake them, and I've done that by accident myself, but you can see here in just a few seconds, the pin cleans right up, so you can reuse it with multiple colors over and over and over, so great advantage there. Okay, it's been 15 minutes and now we'll take the jigs out to cool. Okay, now it's time to start putting the weed guards in, and what I have here is just a piece of cardboard, a mixing instrument, and 5-minute epoxy. You can pick up at any local hardware store, and then I just have my 1/8 inch weed guards. So to mix the epoxy up, all you need to do is just make sure that you mix 2 equal parts, and I'll also do a close-up on this, but mix 2 equal parts like that. And then you just simply take a mixing instrument and just thoroughly mix it up, and you're ready to start painting jigs. I can show you 1 here or 2 at this angle, and then I'll show a close-up. So you simply take the weed guard and just dip it into the epoxy to get a little bit of the epoxy on it, and simply turn and press the weed guard into the cavity, and you end up there with a fully completed bass jig. So here's the close-up shot. I'll do the epoxy once more, and you can see just mix equal parts. Mix the epoxy up. And then just grab a weed guard, dip the weed guard in the epoxy so you end up with just a small bead, and then you simply put it right in the jig. And this is actually one that was with the Teflon pins. Goes right on in. And here we have the ones that were pre-drilled 9/64. Goes right in beautifully. Grab another. Put a little bead of epoxy on it. I kind of roll it right around the cavity there. Goes in beautifully. And there you have another one, and one more here. And just like that, painted bass jigs with weed guards. Well, there you have it. A completely painted jig head, and we've added the weed guard. Obviously, there's many color combinations that we could have used here, but for the sake of this exercise, I just wanted to keep it simple and straightforward. And I hope you've enjoyed watching the video, and I really hope you check out the next one, Making Bass Jigs Part 3, Making Skirts, where we're going to take multiple color combinations and put skirts together, adding them to the jigs that we've painted and added the weed guards, and ultimately coming up with a jig that you can take out yourself, that you have made, and catch giant bass on. Thanks again for watching. I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe to this page, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.